Hello,
Okay.
everyone. Resources. That is the name of the game today. Hi there. I'm Julie Turner,
And I'm Kit Brooks.
and we are Paragon Franchise Consulting. And we are here today with an amazing guest, Samantha. Would you like to introduce yourself, Samantha? Just who you are in a very brief way. We'll dig into it later.
Sure. So, hello, everyone who happens to watch this now or later. I'm Samantha Smith, and I am an accountant, but I do a lot of bookkeeping and year-end preparations for small businesses. And I'm just going to share some tips and resources for you with regards to what you can write off and different structures of business setups.
Awesome. We're super excited about that because taxes, no matter what country you're in or from, are often daunting for the average person, especially somebody with a small business. Maybe it's their first year in business, maybe they've been in business for 10 years, but as we know, the rules, the laws, they change every year. Not all of them, but some of them, and it can be a little bit much. So we've got Samantha here with us today as a resource. She is in Canada, so she is a Canadian accountant. However, as she pointed out to us, many of the laws are similar, if not the same. So we're going to kind of throw a couple things at her today and see if they are the same, because not everything is. And by all means, Samantha, you don't have to have an answer. I've got a couple questions. So thank you so much for being here. Before we get into that, I don't know, Kip, if you wanted to enlighten us at all. Like, how many years have you been a solopreneur in the States dealing with filing your own taxes and all that kind of stuff that may or may not be different from us?
18 years. Yeah, at least 18 years. There were other side hustles and things, but like full time solopreneur, 18 plus.
I have been doing this solopreneur, filing my own taxes, not filing my own taxes. I thankfully have people like Samantha to do that kind of thing for 32 years. And it's still overwhelming to me. It's still something at the end of the year that I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this.
How's it been that long at 29 years old?
I know.
What's
It's
that
in utero and everything. So, Samantha, is there anything that people universally come to you and are worked up about, or what's their main question that they ask you when it comes to small business taxes?
Before I answer your question, I'm going to ask you one question.
Please.
What is it that makes you most stressed out? Like, after 32 years, why are you still stressed out at the end of the year?
Conditioning, probably. Always thinking I've done something wrong. And it's very interesting. So over the last few years, and I know that you'll have energy around this as well, Samantha, over the last few years, we've been kind of almost in fear of doing something wrong when it comes to our health and our government and all this kind of stuff. And it's like we aren't in charge of our own lives. And that's kind of the energy I've had my whole life in two areas. One of them is taxes, and the other one is crossing the border. But when it comes to taxes, I am ridiculously safe. I don't write off anything that isn't a business expense, like anything at all. And yet I feel like I might have done something wrong, and I will have punishment at the end of that.
Okay, so that's fair. But being on my side, I've had to deal with CRA so many times, and I used to be afraid of them in the beginning. And then once you just deal with them so many times, you're just like, okay. So I'll speak to a couple things. So the first thing is, in Canada, CRAs not scary. The IRS is a little bit scarier than CRA, I will admit, because IRS will actually throw people in jail. I mean, that's how they got Al Capone, right? Was tax evasion. And I think when people hear stories like that, it really sticks in your brain, right? stick in your brain because they evoke emotion, and then you've got this story attached to it. So I think when you hear stories like that, like, oh, this big gangster, you know, he got put into jail because of tax evasion, that creates a bit of fear in people. In Canada, we're not quite as harsh, like, and CRA specifically is really good about working with you. You know, if you owe tax money, they'll make a tax plan with you. Like, they're pretty good. I can't speak to what the IRS is like in terms of like making payment plans. I know obviously both organizations want your taxes on time, and they're going to charge penalties and interest and stuff like that. With tax evasion, the worst thing you could do would be to underreport your actual gross income. The least offensive thing you could do would to be overreport on expenses. So over-reporting on expenses, you're more likely to just get a slap on the wrist and, oh, you can't deduct that, as opposed to if you know you had income and you just didn't claim the income, that's frowned upon much more than just over-reporting some expenses. There is a framework of what you can deduct in terms of expenses. CRA and IRS are pretty, they give you a black and a white of like what you can and cannot do, like in terms of explaining. They won't list out every single expense that you could ever deduct. But for instance, I have to buy Monat products because I have another side thing where I also have a few people under me that sell or buy Monat. They're my customers. And so when I have to buy Monat products, well, that's a business expense, even if I am consuming it. But typically it wouldn't be a business expense for most people because it's like, well, you have to shower and wash your hair anyways. But because I sell the products, so these organizations don't list like, oh, you can deduct shampoo and conditioner and hair products. They're going to give you rules. And I'm a big proponent of, I like to work in the gray as much as I possibly can. I like to push the envelope a little bit, because a university teacher said to me, he said, if it's related to you earning business income, you can deduct it. And that's always stuck with me. And when you asked what is the number one thing that people really want to know, it really is, what can I deduct? And I'll get clients who maybe they've never worked with an accountant or a bookkeeper before, and they're not sure what to do. And often in the beginning, they'll really underreport on their expenses, which is a shame because it means way more of their hard-earned money is going to the tax man. And I'm about like, as little of your money should be going to the tax man as possible. Because we don't get a say in how they spend our money. So, and we work hard for that. So let's keep as much of it as possible. Now, every seminar I've ever done, it's always the area that gets the most amount of questions. It could be a 2-hour seminar where I cover 6 different main areas. And the one area that gets the most questions is always, what are the expenses? And people, I'll list a bunch of things and people go, well, what about this? What about this? The only one thing that like is a hard, fast no that you cannot do that I can think of that sometimes people will ask and want to get away with that as like a meals and entertainment thing is golf green fees. That's like a hard, explicit no. IRS,
Really?
all right, yeah. Your green fees. But if you take a client to the golf course and you wine and dine them after your putting, then that's fine. And there's little like unique things. Like I had one client years ago who every Friday night they would bring in beer into their office, and they had part of their business was a digital media. So digital media, branding, videos, And then the other half was renting out office space as like a co-working lab. And so they would bring in beer into the office every Friday. And the main accountant, the one who would file their corporate tax returns, her and I actually had a disagreement one time because she was like, oh, they can't write off 100% of their beer. And I said, yes, they can, because it's on site. So because the beer was on site and everybody was welcome, they could write off 100% of it, as opposed if they took people out to a pub, it would have been 50% write off. So with meals and entertainment, you only get a 50% write off because they're assuming one half is for you, one half is your client. And
Right.
yes.
Okay, that's fascinating. And that actually makes me think of something. I'm sure that you've thought of a bunch of things, but the one thing that I was going to ask you, we were speaking to a bookkeeper in the States here, and she said that this year for sure, they are giving you 100% of meals and entertainment because of, the
Yes.
struggles of the last couple of years. Is that the same in Canada?
So funny enough, because I was doing a bit more researching on US. And as I'd mentioned, I've done a few years ago, I had done some bookkeeping accounting work with a California client, and the rules are very much the same. Again, I will reiterate that. Canada, no, we're not doing the 100%, but I did see that they're doing the 100% in the US. And I believe that was for 2021 and 2022, but it stops in 2023.
So if you're in the States right now, make sure you know that you get 100%, entertain yourself immensely.
Go have some fun.
Well, and another thing I do want to look up actually is in Canada, you are allowed to do 6 meals a year where it's 100% write off. So it would be ideal to take like your 6 largest things. You take some clients out, it's a couple $1,000s. Well, obviously that's one you're going to report as a 100% write off, because they kind of consider like staff Christmas parties or birthday parties, that kind of thing. They allow that 6 per year, 100% write off.
That's awesome to know. I know a lot of companies, they have like a once a year trip for the company. And I think that's 100% write off as well, is it not? What is that called?
So yeah.
Directors meeting or something.
Yeah.
I think it's called the board of directors meeting or something like that. You have to label it as such.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what it falls on.
Yeah, there's like you can do some things, you could put it under like advertising costs, basically, right? Because it's like it's part of you advertising your business. That's another really interesting thing is for people who have vehicles. They always want you to only deduct the portion that's related to your business directly. Like say you drive 78% of the time for business costs, then only 78% of your fuel, your insurance, your car interest payments, that kind of thing, or depreciation, depending on whether you lease or you finance it, can be written off as a business expense, and then the rest would just be considered personal. One way to get around that is to put branding on your vehicle, because then it now becomes an advertising cost and it's 100% deductible.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that. I've always had my vehicle branded for many, many years.
Yeah.
So we haven't done that to this vehicle quite yet. It's
And
waiting.
you only have to
We've
even
talked
put
about
like
it.
something like little, like it doesn't have to be big and tacky. It just
I'm big on advertising anyways. Like I put our logo all the way around that car. I don't even care if we can see out of the car. Just big logo.
Blind spots for us, but not for potential clients.
That's right.
They get to
Everyone will see.
everything would.
Did that make you think of anything? Any questions for her?
Would
Questions, concerns,
That's
crimes
not-
of outrage?
Oh, well, the only thing that's popping in my head right now, I had a couple of things. It'll come back, but it's your comment about Al Capone in the States. One thing I want to mention it as I've been dealing with a tax situation for way too long. And when it first started out, it was very much that stress. And I was like, when does this reach a point that they're going to put me in jail? I was like kind of paranoid about it at the very beginning. And then I talked to a couple of people who had been in way worse situations. And they're like, it's never going to happen. You're not important enough. And I was like, what? And I was like, but I owe this much and it's been this long. Like, what's going on? And he's like, man, plain and simple. He's like, they only put like big time CEOs and celebrities in jail because they want to make an example and they want to strike fear in everybody else. So they never have to worry about it. And they're like, it's just a game. They're like, doesn't matter. And sure enough, I've spoken to like multiple attorneys and accountants over the years that have, you know, a good bit of experience with tax negotiation and settlements and all that. And they all basically said the same thing. They're like, yeah, you've got to owe a ridiculous amount and just show a ridiculous amount of disrespect before they'll actually care about someone at your level. They're like, don't worry about it. They're like, it's, you know, it's nothing. But yeah, they definitely will put people in jail. But yeah, it's more of a, it's like any marketing. It's just more of a scare tactic than anything to keep everybody else in line. It's not as bad as it sounds like.
Well, and I wondered that, and that's why I said, like, people just have that story in their head. Like, I mean, I remember it, for goodness sakes. Like, it's there. It's like, God, this guy was like a big time gangster, you know, killed people, sold drugs to people, and they get him on tax evasion.
Right. That they
That was
could
the thing.
prove.
They were
apparently.
looking for somewhere. It's like, we got to get him somewhere, and that's the only place. And they,
Yeah.
I had a friend, and I actually mentored him, coached him for a while as well. He owned a landscaping business and did very well for himself. And then he got injured, like spinal injury. So he ended up losing everything. And he was on his path trying to get it back. And he had told me his story, but he's like, I didn't pay taxes for years after that. He's like, I was depressed, didn't care because, you know, couldn't walk, all that. So he's like, just let everything go. He's like, after years, 2 tax guys showed up to his door because he wouldn't respond to any other reach out they had done. And he was like, I answered the door and I was like, this is it. I'm going to jail. And he's like, here you are. And they just handed him a letter and they were like, see ya. And he's, that's it. And he's like, well, we just needed to know that you got it. And that was it. And they left. And he's like, I still didn't do anything for a year and a half after that. He's like, and I
Why
didn't
did
really
he
hear
just
anything
file
else.
bankruptcy?
Yeah, he finally did, and he got it all squared away. But yeah, he was just in a very depressed state about a whole lot of different things. But
Yeah.
yeah, he was like, they finally showed up to my door, and he's like, I thought it was feds. I thought it was going away, and he's like,
Yeah.
no, they just handed me a piece of paper and said sayonara, you know, and that was it. So
Well, that's good to know. That answers my question then.
Right.
But and
that
then
is good to know.
the other thing I will say is that, like, in dealing with CRA, it's a funny thing because the agents are never accountants.
Mm.
They're just little minions that have been trained by CRA. And so sometimes you get ones who are good about things, and then sometimes you get ones who are just really daft and just they don't get even CRA's accounting do's and don'ts really. And so that can be a bit frustrating. So sometimes if you get one that's because you're just dealing with that organization, they're people that they've hired to and trained that are not necessarily accountants, and a lot of time they're not accountants, because an accountant typically wouldn't work as like a CRA
Agent.
customer service or auditor person. Like, yeah, sometimes they have an accounting background, but more often than not, they just seem to be, in my experience, they've been just people who have just been trained and not necessarily have the accounting background. Because I had one time, for example, one of my clients who owns a franchise here, he had the franchise startup fee, which had a massive amount of GST, or government sales tax, the federal government sales tax, just for anyone in the US watching. And that the rep that called me and wanted the backup for that, they were so nitpicky. They like, it was addressed to my client personally, their name, but not the corporation. And I was like, that shouldn't matter because it's a business expense. Like when you go to like Lowe's or Home Depot, you don't get a receipt that's addressed to the corporation. It's just, is this a business expense? So it, for example, of like how silly it was. And we had to actually like go back to the franchise and say, can you please change this invoice so it's not addressed to my client personally, but the name of the actual business. And it wasn't even allowed to be his numbered business because he had a numbered holding business that held the franchise. And so stuff like that, where I'm just like, they really don't have an accounting background, because if you had an accounting background, you'd be like, well, yeah, that's a legitimate business expense. It tells you what it's for. And yeah.
Or even just critical thinking ability.
Well,
to
and that's the thing
get
is,
stuck in the rules and the
yeah.
what it says exactly in the guidebook, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I can understand wanting as an employee to do that so that you don't have to make any decisions and have the decisions come back to you. I get that. But there's got to be a way to escalate it easier, sooner, so that somebody that does have decision-making capabilities can get involved. And it seems to be very difficult to make that step without being frustrated at the end, before that happens. So, Samantha, are you actually seeking new clients in this field? Because I know you're very busy. and you're a great resource. So if you are seeking clients, how can they reach out to you?
So in the new year, come like later February, yes, I'll be taking on new clients. Until then, it's a lot of crunch time. And to reach me, you can email me at Samantha, SAMANTHA at BRIKC.ca. So it's brick, it's just switch the K and the C. And before we hop off this, I do want to say one thing and one tip for anybody listening and watching to this. If you are an employee, one of the best things you could do is start a side business, because then you get to write off a bunch of things that you normally would not be able to write off, like a home office, like expenses that you normally typically incur, but that you can't write off because you're an employee. And that can actually go towards reducing your taxes that you pay as an employee. So that's just one other little kind of like, I just love giving people workarounds of like, how can you save money? Like it's your money, you work hard for it. So let's keep as much of it as possible. And that's why I'm also a really big proponent of like just starting something on the side. You don't have to do it full time. And I'm not sure what franchises that you guys have.
I was going to say there are plenty that can be worked part-time for sure.
Yeah. And then
work from home.
Yeah.
Tons of them. Actually, those are some of our favorites.
And I think and to me, I think it's really smart to start a business on the side and then let go of your regular thing once you have the other one built up enough, because there's nothing worse than like being stressed about money, because that energy just goes into your business.
And life.
Yeah, right. That is wonderful advice. And we would love to support anybody out there that's watching this, whether it's live or in the replay. We are reachable going through this link, of course, but you can reach out at paragonfranchiseconsulting.com, and all of our information is on there. We would love to support you to start that side business or your full-time business, whichever is necessary for you. Anything in follow-up? Questions, concerns, cries about Reg?
Thanks, Samantha, so much for all of this. And whenever you decide, whenever we talk you into moving to the States, come on, so we can be first client, because
Yeah, we're the
it
first
has
clients for
been
sure.
so challenging for me over the years to find an accountant who thinks about it, like looks outside the box, and also thinks about what is best for their entrepreneurial client. Well, clients just in general.
Yeah.
I've run into so many over the years who think about it very much like the IRS agent, who just is reading a script and it's like knows only this and no, definitely no gray area, but it's like barely even knows black and white. It's amazing how challenging that is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's sad too, because it's like you said, Julie, it's really is just painstaking when you have to go through those processes. You have
Absolutely.
to push a bit, you have to push, and you have to debate, and you have to know the rules and the laws. And like, gosh, sometimes I get clients who are like, oh my God, I got this bill or this letter from the government. And I'm like, breathe, like, it's okay. Like, they're not so scary.
It's funny that you should say that, actually, because years ago, I don't remember which year it was now, but I had moved to BC from Manitoba, and I had the time to educate myself. So I did all the education for financial advisor one year. The next year I did real estate agent. The following year I did hypnotherapist. And they would not let me write off the education, even though it was a government school for hypnotherapy, because I had already written off enough education the years previous. And I'm like, what does that matter? But like you're saying, it's like, oh my goodness, I got a letter from the government. Fine. Don't write it off then. I don't care. Whatever.
Did you appeal it? Because you
Mm-mm.
can appeal.
I did not.
So that's the other thing, is you can appeal. Like, I had a client one time who, again, he just got a bad and really ignorant rep who just, it's like, look at me, I work for the government, like, it just, and that's their only sense of power in their life. And so they like to, throw that around as much as they can. But this client, and this was prior to working with me, but they had an audit. It was a GST audit, and the rep was denied all the GST on their truck, I believe it was. And they were denying the insurance on their truck because they were like, well, you have 2 vehicles in this business that are registered. You can't have more than one. And he's like, well, I have one for my employee, and then I have my personal one that I drive, and it's for the business. And so the first rep didn't let him. And then he appealed it, got a second person, and it went through no problem. So again, it's kind of like, and it sucks. I get it. If you don't have an accounting background, if you've not worked with them regularly enough to understand the ins and outs, it's scary. It's like, it's nerve-wracking when somebody has the power to chuck you in jail. Like, it's a little scary. So I get it. You want to avoid that at all costs, but like Kip said, like, it just basically doesn't ever happen unless you're really like a true criminal. And there is the process of appeal always when it comes to taxes and law, and you want to use that to your advantage and write off. Like, there's no reason that they should have denied your education amount, because it's like, well, again, it comes back to, that's the thing, there is no flipping law anywhere there is no tax law in Canada that says you are allotted to write off this much education. Nowhere. So it was literally up to that person's discretion, where they said, oh yeah, no, sorry, you can't. And it's like, if you had appealed and said, well, you're making me claim income from my hypnotherapy, right, CRA? And they go, well, yes. And you go, well, the only way I could make that income is by taking this course. Therefore, this is a deductible expense.
Yeah. That's,
Yeah.
and I hadn't even thought about it that way. You're just, okay, fine, whatever, you've made this decision, and I just want you to go away so I can have my life.
I had my accountant actually deny me on, she's like, I'm not even gonna file all this because they're not gonna believe anybody went through that much training. in a year. And I was like, people go to Harvard and spend 10 times what I did, but it's like all of this led up to this certification, this one, and this one. And I was just whatever. But real quick, I know we've got to wrap this up and want to respect your time as well, but in a sentence or two, do you have a good tip for people who can't work with you but need to find someone who actually has intelligence and education and training on all the things above we've been talking about?
Yeah, I would just,
Like a question to ask or just things to look for.
yeah, because I tend to be the one that has had a lot of clients where I've had to clean up their stuff after spending tens of thousands of dollars on bad people. So I would say it's tricky because you have to evaluate, are you a good client or a bad client? You're a bad client if you're not getting your accountants and your bookkeepers information in a timely manner. So you want to make sure that you're doing your part too. So you want to make sure you're getting the proper information in the right amount of time. So always ask them, what do you need from me? And in what time frame do you need it from me in order to be able to file my things on time? And I think it's just a good idea to sit and have a good hour conversation right when you begin or before you begin, so that you know what's expected of you, you know what they're going to provide you. And it's somebody that should be able to suss out what you actually need. If you need more regular reporting, they should be asking those questions. Well, how often do you need reporting? Do you need to see it every month, every quarter, or every year? It's just building the expectations. It's managing the expectations and then making a decision from there and making sure that they know what they're talking about, which you'll kind of get the sense of when you just start asking the questions and peeling back the questions.
That's awesome. Great question. Thank you so much, Samantha. And of course, thank you, Kip, for being here.
Yes.
If you guys have any questions, please reach out, whether they're for us or Samantha. We will direct you where you need to be.
Yeah, thanks, guys.